On August 27, 1931, the Dornier Do X arrived in New York Harbor. It had left Germany 9 months and 25 days earlier. The crossing was supposed to take weeks. It had taken most of a year. A journey of fire damage in England, a catastrophic wing fire in Lisbon that required months of repair, endless mechanical failures across the South Atlantic, and the specific difficulty of an aircraft that sometimes needed the entire length of a harbor to become airborne in tropical heat. Crowds lined the battery and the piers to watch it come in. The New York newspapers covered the arrival the way they covered ocean liner arrivals. The Do X was that size, that dramatic, that visually unprecedented. Children who saw it from the waterfront described it in letters and journals as the largest thing they had ever seen in the air. And it was, in all the ways that mattered, already over. The aircraft that sat in the water off Manhattan in August 1931 was the largest flying boat ever built. It carried 12 engines arranged in pairs along the top of an enormous monoplane wing. It had a wingspan of 48 meters, wider than the Wright Brothers' first flight was long. It had been designed to carry 66 passengers across oceans in the kind of luxury that competed directly with the great ocean liners. Wood-paneled cabins, sleeping berths, a smoking room, a bar, carpeted floors, curtained windows that could give passengers the illusion, at 500 feet above the Atlantic, that they were in a well-appointed hotel room rather than the interior of a flying machine. 2 years earlier, on a single test flight over Lake Constance, it had lifted 169 people off the water simultaneously, a number no aircraft would equal in commercial service for the next 3 decades. It had never carried a single paying passenger in scheduled commercial service. Not before New York, not after, not ever. The Do X is the most extreme example in aviation history of an aircraft that was genuinely ahead of its time in ambition and utterly beyond what its time could support technically. Claude Dornier had looked at the great Atlantic liners of the 1920s, the ocean-crossing flagships that carried wealthy passengers from Southampton to New York in 5 days of luxury, and seen the question that aviation needed to answer. What if you could do the same crossing in 2 days? In 1 day? In hours? What if the luxury liner of the sea became a luxury liner of the air? The answer he built was too large, too heavy, too thirsty, too slow, and too low. And in every dimension that measured commercial viability, the Do X was on the wrong side of the line. To understand what the Do X was trying to do, you need to understand what the world of long-distance travel looked like in 1929. There was no commercial transatlantic airline service. Charles Lindbergh had crossed the North Atlantic alone in 1927, in 33 hours and 29 minutes, in a single-engine aircraft barely large enough to carry the fuel. The achievement was extraordinary. The aircraft was a custom machine carrying nothing but the pilot and the determination to arrive. The Bremen, a German Junkers aircraft, had made the crossing westward in 1928. These were flights of individual courage, not services. If you wanted to cross the Atlantic in 1929 with a reasonable expectation of surviving, you took an ocean liner. You spent 5 to 7 days at sea. The Zeppelin, the hydrogen-filled airship that the German aviation industry was simultaneously developing, could cross the Atlantic and was beginning to do so on a schedule that looked, if you squinted, like a commercial service. The Graf Zeppelin, which made its first transatlantic passenger crossing in 1928, was carrying a small number of paying passengers between Germany and South America by 1931. But the Zeppelin was a rigid, lighter-than-air craft, limited in how much useful payload it could carry relative to its enormous volume, dependent on expensive ground infrastructure, and consumed by the danger that hydrogen represented as a lifting gas. It was a solution, of sorts. It was not the solution. Claude Dornier believed the solution was a flying boat. A flying boat needed no runway. It could operate from any sufficiently calm body of water, a harbor, a bay, a protected coastal anchorage. In 1929, paved runways long enough for a large aircraft barely existed, but the ocean was everywhere, and the coastal cities that a transatlantic route needed to serve, New York, Lisbon, Southampton, all had harbors where a flying boat could land. The concept was sound. The Pan American Clippers that eventually established transatlantic commercial service in 1939 were flying boats. Dornier's vision of what the transatlantic future looked like was correct. The machine he built to achieve that future was not. The Do X needed 12 engines because the technology of 1929 could not produce a small number of large, reliable engines. The most powerful aero engines available at the time of the aircraft's design produced around 500 horsepower each. To lift 56,000 kilograms of aircraft, fuel, and passengers off the water required approximately 6,000 to 7,000 total horsepower. 6,000 horsepower at 500 horsepower per engine meant 12 engines. The mathematics were inescapable. The consequences of 12 engines were also inescapable. 12 engines meant 12 sets of moving parts, 12 potential failure points, 12 fuel systems drawing from shared tanks, 12 sets of maintenance requirements that had to be met before each flight. The original Siemens Jupiter engines that the Do X was fitted with proved unreliable enough in multi-engine service that they had to be replaced with American Curtiss Conqueror engines, a significant admission that German industry in 1929 couldn't produce an engine adequate to the demands of the program. Even with the Curtiss replacements, failures were common. The South Atlantic crossing during the New York voyage required multiple stops, partly for fuel and partly because one or more engines had failed and needed work before continuing. An aircraft carrying 12 engines is an aircraft that is 12 times as likely to have an engine problem on any given flight as an aircraft carrying one. And then there was the ceiling. If you find aviation history like this compelling, subscribe. One new story every week. The Dornier Do X had a service ceiling of approximately 500 meters, 1,640 feet above sea level. This is not a misprint. This is not the cruising altitude. It is the maximum altitude the aircraft could reach in normal operation. At 500 meters, the Do X was flying at the level of a moderate hill. It was lower than most of the high-rise buildings that would be built in the cities it was designed to serve. It was too low to fly over significant terrain. It was too low to climb above most weather. On the transoceanic crossing, it could not escape weather by climbing through it. It had to find a way around every storm system, every front, every patch of turbulence that a higher-flying aircraft would simply cross above. The reason was weight and power in combination. The Do X was simply too heavy for its engines to push much higher than sea level. Getting 56,000 kilograms to 500 meters was, at full load, approximately what 12 engines of 1929 technology could do. There was nothing in reserve for altitude. The range of 1,700 kilometers compounded the ceiling problem. The North Atlantic, from Newfoundland to Ireland, is roughly 3,000 kilometers. The Do X, which could manage 1,700, needed at least 2 or 3 stops on a crossing that Lindbergh had made in one hop. The stops required calm water. The Atlantic does not reliably provide calm water. The island chains, the Azores, the Canaries, the Cape Verde Islands, that the South Atlantic route used were available, but each one was a potential delay, a weather wait, a mechanical problem discovered at a place where spare parts might be weeks away. The journey to New York captured all of this in its 10-month span. The fire at Calshot in England, where an engine compartment caught during flight and forced an emergency landing. The devastating fire in Lisbon in December 1930 that destroyed the left wing while the aircraft was moored and required months of reconstruction before the voyage could continue. The grinding progress through the Canary Islands, Cape Verde, along the Brazilian coast, through the Caribbean, northward to New York, the repeated delays, the mechanical work, the waiting for weather that never fully cooperated. When the Do X finally landed in New York on August 27, 1931, 10 months after leaving Amsterdam, it had proved that it could make the crossing. It had proved nothing about whether the crossing could be made usefully. The Pan American Clipper would eventually do it in 3 days. The Do X had taken most of a year. The record of 169 passengers carried on October 21, 1929, the flight that remains the Do X's most cited achievement, was not a commercial service. It was a demonstration flight over Lake Constance with guests and crew packed aboard to demonstrate what the aircraft's structure could support. The 169 people were invited observers, employees, journalists, and anyone else who could be assembled for the occasion. The flight lasted a few hours over the lake and involved no destination, no route, no ticket price. In normal commercial operation, the DoX was configured for 66 passengers in comfortable sleeping berth accommodation, still an enormous number for 1929, when a large airliner might carry 12 passengers, but not the 169 that made the headlines and entered the record books. The record stood nonetheless, for longer than the aircraft deserved credit for. No aircraft in scheduled commercial service would carry 169 passengers routinely until the jet age, until the Boeing 707, which first flew in 1957 and entered service in 1958 with exactly the range of passenger numbers the DoX had demonstrated possible in a single lake flight 29 years earlier. The demonstration was a remarkable piece of aviation theater. The aircraft that performed it could not support the commercial structure that the demonstration implied. 3 DoXs were built in total. The original German aircraft, and 2 variants built for the Italian government with different engines and marginally better performance. The Italian aircraft used more powerful Italian engines that gave them somewhat better altitude capability. They operated briefly in Italian service, primarily for prestige purposes. None of the 3 established commercial services. The original Do X returned to Germany from New York in 1932. It was placed on display and eventually transferred to a museum in Berlin. Allied bombing raids during the Second World War destroyed most of it. What the aircraft began cannot be destroyed. The idea that a large, luxurious flying boat could connect the great port cities of the world, that the ocean, which the Titanic had shown was a killer, could also be a runway, was correct. Pan American proved it right with the Boeing 314 Clippers in 1939. The Clippers were smaller, more practical, more reliable. They drew lessons from everything that had happened between 1929 and 1939, including the lesson of the Do X. The Do X's failure was not the failure of an idea, it was the failure of a timeline. The aircraft was built roughly 10 years before the technology existed to build it properly. The engines weren't there. The aerodynamics weren't there. The weight management wasn't there. Claude Dornier was correct about where aviation was going. He was wrong about how fast it could get there. And 169 people flew over Lake Constance in October 1929. More people in a single aircraft than the world would see again for 3 decades. While the aircraft that carried them slowly became obsolete before it ever entered service. If this story was worth your time, hit like and subscribe, and drop what you think in the comments.